My name is Dan Schwartz. I'm 52 and I'm living with PTSD. In my journey with learning about my PTSD, my situation, I've learned that there's a lot of different things that stack up, but there was one particular call that we had with a 18-year-old male on a motorcycle out in the woods, and the events of that incident were really what led to, I guess you call, the break. And we were really far out in the woods, very remote. It was a Department of Land Management land, so not even really on the map. And it was a long, stressful drive to get out there. I was driving our medic unit, which is a heavy international, but we were on basically 4x4 dirt roads getting out there. And when we got to where we couldn't go any farther, the young man who was leading us back to his friend said, well, it's just up over this rise. So we got out of the rig and grabbed our equipment and started walking. And it turned out that just over the rise was probably a half mile. And so it was a long way. We got to the young man, and it was really my partner's call. He was lead, I was skills. And as we got to the young man, my partner did a quick assessment, cut his shirt open, and realized he had a very large sucking chest wound. And he put his hand on it, and it's like he just stopped. And he yelled, sucking chest wound. And I got up to him and I was like, okay, great, what do you want to do? And he just looked at me and he said, it's a sucking chest wound. And that was where he couldn't go any farther. And then I realized, okay, I have to switch gears. Now I'm in charge and I have skills and I got to do this. And the young man was 18. My daughter was 18 at the time. And I was kind of thinking about that and Saving Private Ryan, the scene where the sniper shoots him and no matter what he does, it doesn't get any better. It started to feel like that because I literally had to do everything. And the firefighters that were with us, you know, they just wanted direction, but you're the medic, you have to do everything. So I started the IV, went to seal this guy's chest wound, and I was like, okay, I need a chest seal. And I realized we didn't have a chest seal that was in the rig back a half mile. So I used a piece of plastic from an intubation tube, and I just made one the best I could. And my partner, though, he was checked out. So I was doing it all with the help of the other guys. And I went to intubate this young man, and when you intubate, you get down. So he was laying on his back looking up, and I was on my stomach at his head. We're face to face. And he would take a breath, and he would breathe, and then he couldn't breathe, and we'd burp the seal on his chest, and you'd hear the air and the blood. And when I got ready to intubate him, he asked if he could call his mom. He kept saying, I need to talk to my mom, I need to talk to my mom. And I knew for an 18-year-old kid, he was a big kid, you know, out dirt biking with his buddies. He was scared if he wanted to talk to his mom, and yet we're out there, there's no way he could talk to his mom. And I told him, we can't call your mom right now, but I'm going to take good care of you. And I went to intubate him, and he looked at me and he said, I'm scared. And I said that it's okay. I'm going to take good care of you, and I'm going to give you some medicine. I said, and it's going to make you feel weird, and then you won't feel anything. You'll relax, and I'll take good care of you. And so he looked me right in the eyes, and I told the firefighter to push the drugs, and he went under, and I intubated him. It actually went well, and then everything got worse. We had blood coming out of his chest, blood coming out of his nose. But we started moving, and we loaded him up as best we could, and we're running down the trail with this kid, and a tribal wildlife officer showed up in his pickup truck, and he said, "Hey, I heard there was trouble out here. Can I help you?" And we're like, "Yeah." So we put this kid in the back of the pickup truck, and we're starting to go down the trail, and I realized he didn't have a pulse. So now I'm trying to hold on and do compressions on him and draw up drugs and trying to work him. And we get to the rig and started another line, and then we realized we didn't know where we were. And we were on the radio trying to call in airlift, but we didn't know where we were. So the tribal officer said, "Hey, follow me. I know where we're going. There's a street and a gate." And so we started to follow, and we got to the gate in the street, and we opened up, and we realized he didn't know where he was. He had told us the wrong place, and we had called for the landing zone to be set up, but we weren't there. And so then we had to go someplace else, and we eventually got there, and no matter what we did, we couldn't get a pulse back. We had blood all over the floor. Everybody was covered in blood and mud and sweat, and I realized we'd been doing this for probably 45 minutes, and I called our control doc for permission to stop. And the control doc said, "Well, hey, you got an 18-year-old male, really good chance of survival. Go ahead and keep doing what you're doing and give him some blood products." And I was like, "Oh, okay, blood products." And then I was like, "We don't carry blood products, doc." And I looked on the ground, and then there was blood everywhere. I said, "Like, the only blood we've got is coming from the patient." And he said, "Well, what fluids do you have?" I said, "Normal saline, and we've already got 2 liters in him, and it's coming out, you know." And the doc said, "Okay, great. Yeah, 18-year-old male, just keep going with what you're doing. That sounds like a great plan." And the helicopter was inbound, and I got off the phone with him, you know, and I told the crew, "Hey, the directions are we got to keep doing what we're doing." But we all knew it wasn't going to work. And then the helicopter crew landed, and I went to talk to the airlift nurses, and I told the guys, "You just got to keep doing CPR, guys, because we have to follow our direction." And I went to the nurses and told them that was going on, and they're like, "Wow, what can we do?" And I said, "Can you guys come take a look and make sure that I didn't forget anything?" Because I didn't want to forget anything. And so they got in the back, and they were awesome. They were great. They checked everything out, and they're like, "No, you guys are doing everything. You've done everything. You've done more than you could." And they said, "But what can we do to help you?" And I said, "Well, I know you can't fly this guy, because you can't fly a patient with trauma, cardiac arrest ongoing in a helicopter." And so I said, "Could you call the Harborview trauma doc, and maybe we can get permission for you to call the code, and maybe you can stop this." So they got on the phone with the trauma doc, and I had gone to school at Harborview. I knew the procedure. And the nurse started to talk to the trauma doc, and finally the nurse stopped, and she said, "Hey, the trauma doc wants to talk to you." And I said, "Okay." I got on the phone, and I told the doctor the whole story, and she was awesome. She said, "Dan, you've done everything you could do. That boy's not going to survive, and he wasn't going to survive when you got there." So thankfully, she let us stop, and that's not when the call stopped, unfortunately. Turned out, because it was on tribal land, the tribal police that we had with us, I thought, would be able to take possession of the body, but they couldn't, because he was white and a non-tribal member. So we had to sit right there with the kid in the rig, the blood everywhere, the mud everywhere, and we had to wait for a Snohomish County Sheriff's officer to come. And we waited a long time, and we were sitting in a parking lot, and eventually he told us, or a tribal police officer said, actually no, a sheriff's officer said, the guy who's coming to investigate won't be here for a while, but why don't you guys park over there by the state patrol office? So we kind of got out of the way instead of being right in the middle of a parking lot, which was good. And then the sheriff's deputy left. And it's just me and my partner and this dead kid in the back. And it was already late afternoon when this whole call started, and now it's starting to get dark, and it's starting to get late, and we're just sitting there, and we didn't know what to do. And I'm replaying the call in my mind, and I'm talking to my partner. I'm like, could we have done anything different? And then this deputy shows up, like a detective, and he climbed in the back, and he was complaining about how he got called away from dinner and how he's just sick and tired of this sort of thing interrupting his life. And he climbed in the back with this kid, and he just treated this kid like a piece of meat. He just was flopping him around, taking pictures, just no respect for this kid at all. And he got done. He said, all right, I'm done. And we said, okay, so what should we do with the body? And he said, I guess the MEs are coming, but I'm out of here. And he left. And now it's getting later and later, and we're sitting and we're waiting. And at one point we see this car come flying up with a police officer right behind him. And the car stopped, and the doors opened, and the police officer pulled in front of them between us and the car. And all we could see, because of the headlights in our eyes, was some people moving, and then they got back in the car and they left. And then the police officer left, and we waited, and finally the medical examiner came, and she was awesome. She was respectful and caring, and she said, gosh, you guys could have taken him to your station. I would have come to the station for you. So anyway, finally she left, and it was now probably 8 o'clock at night. We hadn't eaten, so we're fatigued, we're hungry, we're frustrated, we're angry, and this call's gone on and on and on. And then we had to go back to the station, and there was so much mud and blood and everything in the back of the rig, we had to park it on a hill and take the stretcher out and take the stretcher mount out and just get a hose in there and hose everything out. And then we had to take our kits out and take everything apart and wash everything. We did all of that, and again, we hadn't eaten, and we're tired and we're sweaty, and we had to change our uniforms. But back then, you just went on to the next call. And we went on a couple calls, and we went on a couple more calls, and because I had been skills, now I was in charge. And we went on a call that was a choking. It comes in as a male choking. And we get there, and this kid's sitting playing video games. And, we go piling in there because we're dispatched for a kid choking. And we walk in, and this kid's playing video games, and I'm like, did you guys call 911? And the kid's mom says, well, yeah, he was choking. And I said, on what? And she goes, I don't know. He was chewing on his game controller because he was upset, and then he started choking. And I snapped. And I said some things that were inappropriate, and the captain came and grabbed me, and he's like, let's go outside. I'll take care of this. And I was just so mad. I was like, are you kidding me? You're calling me for this after we've had this happen? So anyway, that wasn't like me. I'm not like that. And went back to the station, and I couldn't sleep. I didn't sleep all night. I went home the next morning, had the house to myself. My wife was already gone to work. My kids were already gone to school. And normally I would just go to bed and sleep. And as soon as I would close my eyes, I'd see the kid's face, and I'd hear his voice, and I could smell the dirt and the blood and the trees. And I was right there. And that happened to me every time I tried to close my eyes and go to sleep for days. And I was angry at little things. I was on edge. But I just thought, well, it was a bad call. I've been a medic for a long time, been on a lot of bad calls, seen a lot of bad stuff. And I just thought, well, this is just one more. So I didn't know that this was the event. This was back in 2012, and my wife and my 2 girls had made a deal. They would read The Hunger Games, the book, and it was like a book club for the 3 of them, and then the prize for finishing the book was getting to go see the movie. So we were all happy. We all went to the movie theater. We're watching The Hunger Games, and it's a good movie. And I don't know if you remember the movie, but there's a little girl and then the hero, and they're out in the woods, and the little girl gets shot in the chest, and she starts to do that breathing pattern just like the kid with the and I'm watching the movie, and I'm all of a sudden, like that, I was in the woods with the kid. And I started just sobbing. And at the same time, I'm like in the woods and sobbing. At the same time, my brain is saying, no, you're sitting in the theater. Stop crying. You're drawing attention to yourself, you know. And my daughter's like, Daddy, what's wrong? What's wrong? And my wife's telling her to just shh, and, you know, she's trying to. Nobody knew what was going on. I didn't know what was going on. I'm freaking out. My heart was racing. I'm crying. I'm embarrassed. I'm confused. Eventually, the movie went on. I calmed myself down. We left, and that's when I knew. That's when I knew this was bad, and that's when I knew I needed to find some help.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. So do I have situations that can cause flashbacks? Yeah. We lost our lab. He was my hunting buddy, and he was a great dog, and he had cancer. And this was probably a year after the event, and he was getting sick, and we knew the time was over. But at one point he had a weird breathing pattern, and he coughed up some blood. And right back again. I lost it. I was in the woods. I smelled the blood. I smelled the dirt. I smelled the trees. My heart was racing. I had to go outside the house and sit on the deck and like take deep breaths. And then I love being out in the woods. But there's been some times that we've been out enjoying the outdoors, and there's just the right combination of like cedar tree, pine tree smell and dirt, and I kind of like almost takes me back. And I've been on some other calls where a patient, if they start to have that particular sort of odd breathing pattern, even though it's not a sucking chest wound, which is not very common to see, I kind of start to feel myself get a little more stressed right then. But luckily, I haven't had too many other events where that really strong of a flashback will come. Sometimes it's just something, a stressful time, something will happen, excuse me, where I just start to feel that out of control feeling where my heart rate goes really fast, and it's almost like it's hard to think for a little bit, because it's like I feel like I'm sort of losing control. and I just have to try and bring myself back. My wife went through a really difficult, scary, life-threatening medical condition, and there's been a couple times where that stress, I think, has sort of brought that back to me, where I feel that out of control feeling, and it's not like I'm back in the woods, but I have that out of control, something really bad is happening feeling. But luckily I've kind of learned how to control myself. So do I have the thoughts pop back in my head without any triggers? I would say a little bit, not as strong. I recently had an overdose of a teenager, young male, again similar age to my daughter, and it was a cardiac arrest due to an overdose. And we worked this kid for a long time, and everything on our monitor said we're going to get a pulse back, and we didn't. And it was so frustrating. We did CPR on him for almost an hour. We did everything. And when the call ended, all I could think about was, dang, he's just another kid. And it like took me there. And it was like, I was almost like comparing that call in the woods to this kid. And yeah, it comes back. Do I have trouble sleeping? Do I feel like I sleep too much? And when I do sleep, do I have nightmares or night terrors? I do have a lot of trouble sleeping. I have a hard time falling asleep, and then I have a hard time staying asleep. And very frequently I'll wake up in the middle of the night with like a start, and I'm just covered in sweat. And I can't necessarily connect that to anything like a nightmare, but I jolt awake with almost like a gasp, and I'm covered in sweat. And we keep our house cold at night. I got a fan blowing. I'm like doing all these things. We bought a special mattress because I'm feeling like, well, I'm too hot at night, but it's not like that. And yeah, I have a hard time sleeping. When I'm at work, I can't fall asleep till midnight, sometimes later, and then of course we're up for calls, and then I come home, and really the weird thing is I can only get my best sleep sort of like in the morning. And I sometimes wonder if that's just because I'm so exhausted. But yeah, the slightest sound, the slightest move, whatever, I'm awake. So yeah, I have a lot of trouble sleeping. Do I have difficulties with memory since that took place? That's a good question. Sometimes I feel like I've got too many tabs open on my computer. There's too much stuff running in the background, and I have to make myself focus. But I've really, since the break, and since I started really looking for answers and looking for solutions and looking for help, one of the things I've really latched onto for me has been mindfulness meditation, and also some yoga for first responders, which sort of teaches you that when there's a lot of things going on, too many tabs open, sort of helps you to learn how to try and focus. And so, yeah, when I'm having trouble with memory, when I've got too many tabs open, I go back to that mindfulness, and I try and bring myself to focus a little bit, and that seems to help. So do I find it difficult to talk about the event in certain situations? It's interesting, so many lay people, when they find out you're a firefighter or a paramedic, they'll say, "What's the worst thing you've ever seen?" And when you say that to one of us, we can't help but suddenly seeing these things in our minds, and we don't want to see those. We don't want to bring them up, but they're there. And it's almost like it just takes that question to, boom, turn on the video in our heads. And if people ask that question, I can't talk about the situation. But one of the things that I've done since I've discovered that I have PTSD, I teach EMT class at a community college. And we have 3 quarters a year, 50 students a quarter. And I've taken it upon myself to talk about PTSD to them because I feel like no one ever told me about it. And I want them to know that you're going into a career where this is a potential. And if it happens to you, you're okay. You're not broken. You're not weird. It's just because you're human and you care about people. And so I feel like every time I tell my story in the right context where I'm in control of telling the story and I'm doing it for the right reasons, it takes some of the power away from that bad memory because I'm bringing it up on purpose instead of having it get to me, and I'm doing it for a reason. So do I feel, or do I deal with feelings of guilt or shame? I would say not shame so much, but guilt, and even, I don't even know if that's the right word. I'd say not being good enough, not doing enough. Like the feeling that there should have been something more I could have done in that situation or in another situation, another call. I'm always trying to deal with that feeling that could I have done more? Should I have done more? Why didn't I do more? So it's there, yeah. So what was my first step in looking for help? I'm kind of a researcher. I want to know things. So the first thing I did was I started researching what was I experiencing? What is that? And I realized I had all the signs and symptoms of PTSD. And so then I started to research that. And almost by accident, I was watching a TV show, and Dan Harris, the TV news guy, came on, and he talked about his situation where he had an on-screen mental break. And as he talked about it, I was like, oh my gosh, that's just like me. And that led me to do more research. And also, luckily, I knew a really good counselor in our area that I had already worked with in the past for some other events. And I trusted him, and I felt comfortable with him. And so once I realized I had an issue, I had a problem, I got a hold of him, and I spent probably a year going and seeing him for a while, twice a week and then once a week, and having just, a really good understanding counselor. But also my research led me to those other things I talked about, that mindfulness meditation, and with my counselor, cognitive therapy and things like that. So what was the biggest thing that has helped me the furthest? I think first of all would be understanding that you're not weird, you're not broken, you don't have a mental problem, and just trying to accept and understand what's going on in your mind, and understanding that call had all the things happen that make an event in someone's life lock into their brain. Because one of the questions I had was, I've seen all these bad things, I've done all these things and experienced all these things, how come that didn't do it? And I've come to learn that there's certain things that if this is the condition you're in, it'll lock in your brain, and your brain is wired to then come back to that, and it comes back to it over and over again. So I'd say the biggest thing is the understanding and acceptance that you're okay, you're not broken, you just have an issue to deal with. And then I think the second one is what I've talked about already, is that mindfulness meditation that has really been the key to my success. How do I view my future moving forward? That's a good question. I've come to a point where it's hard for me to want to keep going on these calls, and it's made me question, am I going to be able to keep doing what I'm doing until I retire? It's funny, I never used to think about retiring. I just went to work, and it was good. And now I think about not going to work a lot, and I really like not going to work. Even though I love my job, and I couldn't imagine doing anything else, I'm kind of done seeing these things and experiencing it. So the future it's a little up in the air. I'm not at a point where I can stop, and I'm working to try and find other things that I can do within my department that will reduce my exposure to these sorts of calls, but nothing's definitive at this point, and I just have to move forward working on keeping myself mentally and physically as healthy as I can be. So if someone's just experiencing something that makes them think they might be dealing with PTSD, I think the first thing that I would tell them to do is to talk to someone else who understands them, because not everyone can understand that situation. One of the things I tell my new EMTs and I tell my new firefighters is get a hold of me, get a hold of someone else that you trust, and talk to them. Because I think the worst thing that someone who's experiencing these symptoms can do is keep it to themselves. And the science sort of backs that up, because if you experience it and you then feel like you need to try and suppress it because of shame or fear or whatever, that locks it in harder into your brain, because now it puts another negative thing to it, which is the emotions of fear or shame. So the first thing I would say is talk to someone about it. And then the second thing I would say is talk to a professional about it and get some help. You know, it's like I tell these people, it's something you can deal with if you deal with it. But if you try and squash it, hide it, pretend it's not there, suppress it, or worse, if you use other things to try and cope, that's just going to make it way worse. So that's a good question. How would a loved one who is with someone who's experiencing those signs and symptoms, how would they help? I think the first thing is that the person who's observing these signs and symptoms, they need to try and put themselves in a position of putting all judgments aside, you just have to be understanding and open and understand that person's experiencing fear and shame and guilt and confusion and all these things inside them that they don't understand. So the only way you can help them is to come at it from a completely loving, non-judgmental, open point of view. Whereas, you know, if your loved one is suddenly having these weird mood swings, don't get angry at them. Instead, say, hey, this doesn't seem like you. Something seems to be bothering you. Can we talk about it? And if the person doesn't want to talk about it, that's okay. We don't have to force it. and then come back to them on another time. And I think the biggest thing is just come at it understanding, non-judgmental, because that person knows there's something wrong. They don't want to be doing what they're doing, but they also don't understand it, and they're afraid of it. And luckily my wife's been awesome on this journey for me, and I've had to learn to communicate with her just like she's had to learn how to communicate with me. And there's times where I'll be in a mood and I know it's wrong and I don't understand it, but I'll say to her, look, I'm sorry, I'm just having this happen right now. And she'll reassure me, it's okay, it's all right. What can we do? And whether it's, I need to go be by myself for a little bit, or we need to be together for a little bit, we'll negotiate it, but it's that loving, open understanding and supportiveness. So if that person says, hey, I need to go talk to someone, okay, let's do everything we can to make that happen. Don't put roadblocks up to anything. And then also, I think if you see what seems like maybe new behavior that could be destructive or hurtful, like they're drinking too much or there's something else going on, don't draw attention to that in a shame-causing way. Instead, say, wow, I've noticed that this is happening. Are you okay? What's going on? You never used to drink like this, or whatever behavior it might be. And understand that even though that might make you angry that they're doing that, they're probably, that person they feel just as bad about it as you feel bad seeing them do it. I would just say that, the people that get into these careers, law enforcement, fire, EMS, military, we do it because we want to help people. And because you want to help people, that means you care about people. And when bad things happen and you care about it, a little bit of that's going to stick with you. And that's something we should be proud of, not be afraid of, because that's what makes us good at our jobs. That's what makes us who we are. And so it's okay that these things stack up and you take a piece of that with you, but instead of letting that drag you down, be proud of who you are, be proud of what you do, and when it starts to be too much, just find help, find a solution. For me, it was that mindfulness meditation and the yoga for first responders. It could be something for somebody else, but do something for it, be healthy with it, and be proud of who you are, and don't be afraid of it. That's what I would say.